Good afternoon, everybody. We're out on the street here on Westminster Street in front of Grace Church on this gorgeous spring day, and you just heard the tower bells, and we are about to take you pretty far up that tower. So we're going to go in the front door and begin to make our way up and talk about the history of the tower bells here at Grace. So we've come inside. It's much cooler and much darker in here. Of course, we're in the narthex, which is the sort of vestibule or lobby of a church, particularly an Episcopal church. We call it the narthex, through these front doors. And if you remember, last Tuesday, we went up basically this side of the building, and we went all through the organ, which many of you have told me you enjoyed immensely. Well, we're going to climb even higher today and go up through the bell tower. You can access the bell tower through the organ gallery, and David will show you that later, but we're going to go a way that people probably don't even know exists. So we'll pass through the narthex with some of this beautiful 1846 woodwork along the way, and then we'll begin to take you up and through the sort of Quasimodo land, as it were. We have some plaques that reference restoration projects through the years, the cross on the top of the tower, the spire, tower and spire, and the bells themselves, which have been restored. We'll talk about that in a bit, and we can get a quick shot here. This is actually a trap door, or a door where the bells could, in theory, be lowered through this door if they needed to be. Hopefully, we don't need to do that anytime soon. But in this very little remote corner of the narthex, past the restroom, there's a little curtain here. Pull that back. There's a tiny doorway, and that's where we're going to go. This tower that we're about to climb, if you were out on the corner of Westminster and Mathewson, look at the tower, and you'll see this little curved, jutting out mini tower, which houses the staircase we're about to go into. There's even a bit of stained glass as we go up. And we're going to make our first stop as we come up this wonderful little wooden staircase. This is our first level. We're going to be visiting 4 levels of the tower today. It goes on beyond that, but today we're going to take in 4 different levels. This is the first. So what we see here in this room is the actual clavier, it's called, which is German for keyboard. This is the keyboard that controls our tower bells. And this and the bells themselves date to 1861, just at the beginning of the Civil War. And I can, while David's showing you the clavier up close, do this without tearing things up. So this big clavier keyboard, I don't know if this will show David, so maybe put it up here. And the bells, these are our bells. These are in the foundry, I believe. This is where they were set up as they were going to be here in the tower, as you're going to see them. And when we come up, I believe we're going to come up right under this bell. This is the big low D bell. But this was a picture of the bells in the foundry, made in Boston by the Hooper firm in 1861. And brought here, we have another photo which we'll find and attach, David, that has the bells arriving on a flatbed, I believe drawn by, I think it was pulled by horses, but it was definitely a big flatbed. I'll put this over here. So just a word about how the bells work. We'll talk about that before we actually see the bells. This is a keyboard, much like a piano keyboard. It almost looks like organ pedals, but you play with your hands. This is not technically a carillon, because a carillon has to have 23 bells to be a carillon. This is called a ring of bells. Our bells don't swing. They're mounted in place, fixed, and they're struck by a hammer, either from the inside or the out. And our bells can be rung several different ways. We'll talk more about that. But here we start on D and we go up. We miss a few half steps. We have D, E, F sharp, then we go by half step. G, G sharp, A sharp. So, and you'll see the wire. This goes from here all the way up to where you're going to see how far we're going. This wire goes up to these bells. Each wire goes to one bell. And when I push down a key hard, it will trigger a hammer and the bell will ring. Now, one of the interesting things, you just heard outside how loud the bells are. That corner of Westminster and Mathewson, those bells are loud. I've seen tourists and visitors on the street absolutely jump or drop packages when they start to ring. Here, you'll be amazed at how quiet they are. I'm going to give you a little taste of Amazing Grace here. I'll see if I try not to miss a note. It's a very athletic musical experience to play these. You really have to give them a whack. This, of course, would be the music rack. And this beautiful case ultimately could be restored, and we might give it a good wipe down one of these days. It's a nice, big, thick piece of wood. Has to be very sturdy because, as you see, you really give it a whack when you're playing. So, shout out to our sexton, Mayette, who recently did a nice cleanup in this room and did some really good tidying up for us so that we could give you this tour. It was a little frightening in here. David's giving you a good view of the inside of those. See what happens. You can see the whole mechanism goes down. So that's how we control the bells. So I can play them here. That's not how they play when you hear the hour rung. That's done by a mechanical, or non-mechanical, computer really, which sits out in front of the organ case where we took you last week. That programs, it actually plays the bells, but it's the computer telling them to play at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, so forth, and playing the Westminster chime. That's one way that the bells can play. This is another way, and we'll talk about a third way as we go on up. And maybe David can just point towards the gallery door and show you. So that's the edge of the organ case, the opposite edge where we came in last week for our organ tour. So you can sort of get an idea of where this room is. So, 1861 technology, nothing like it. But there's more to see. This is one of 4 levels, so let's climb. One of my favorite things in this stairwell is this one long, beautiful, polished piece of wood that's the center part of this stairwell. Now, as we get to this level, it's going to start to get much more interesting, and our beautiful little stairwell is going to go away. And we have very different climbing mechanisms here. So David's now joining me in the second level of our climb. This is the clock mechanism is here. And before we go around, maybe we can just show this. The clock that we're going to show you, which dates from 1929, allowed the bells to then ring the Westminster chime. You see the four wires, ding, 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 right? And it allowed it to ring the Westminster chime without somebody having to climb up to that clavier and play it themselves every hour, which could have been tiresome. So the mechanical clock had the ability to ring the hour, and I think even the quarter hour and half hour. Now you can see, obviously, two of these are completely detached. We don't use this anymore to ring the bells. We either do it by hand at the clavier or the computer now controls them. But this was a second of 3 ways that the bells could be rung. So at least 4 of the bells, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 that play the Westminster chime had 4 different ways they could be rung from the mechanism of the bell, striking inside, striking outside, or striking high inside. So we'll come into this sort of, again, it's really Quasimodo-esque as we go up. You see the wonderful stone and rubble interior walls. The tower, as you saw, it was not completed in 1846. It was only built up a bit when the church was built in 1846. And I apologize about not knowing the actual year, but it wasn't that many years later that the tower was completed. But it was not complete in 1846, so the church looked sort of cut off. But boy, they did complete it, and you see the inside of all of this. You can also see, maybe David can show you, over on that side, in the midst of that brick, there's a window. There are 3 windows in this section, and at some point they boarded them up. I suspect it was because of leakage, and they were causing trouble, being meddlesome, and so they boarded them up. But this, and if you see from the street below, you can look up and see where they would have been. So we have in front of us here those wires that went from the clavier downstairs. These wires just continue on up, on up, on up, on up. And then over here we have this marvelous clock. If there are any clock fanatics out there, you're going to love this. This is from 1929. Seth Thomas from Connecticut, a very famous clockmaker in Thomaston, Connecticut. David, get close, I'll let him get in and I'll get away. Talk about ingenious mechanism. And that's what keeps our tower clock running. Now it's a little slow upstairs right now. This clock is it gets a little behind, about 5 minutes over the period of a month. But considering it's been ticking since 1929, that's not too bad. It was restored, I think, in the 1980s, and still works really well. We just have it adjusted every so often. But that big, heavy pendulum is what keeps it all going. And that was what also rang the Westminster chime. So that's what operates our clock. And you'll see, and maybe just, David, if you've already done it, zone in on the pole that goes up, the green pole. That green pole that goes up there, you're going to see what that connects to 2 levels above this and how it controls the actual clock face. That turn rod is what controls all of it. 1 rod down here, 4 upstairs. And on this side, just before we head up, the windows, some of you have asked about the windows in the nave of the church. We have the big, beautiful windows, and then at the top, along both sides there, small windows we call the clear story, the clear story windows, because they would have been in the clear story portion of the church. They're dark now. They do have lighting behind them. It's not very good lighting, it's not very pretty lighting, and we're trying to scheme a way to use that lighting and make it look more attractive to light those windows. But this is one of them, and this one goes into the organ itself, so you don't see this one so much from the nave, even though it's open into the sort of the organ case. This is the back side of one of them. And then to David's left is a very, very frightening tunnel where the access to the rest of them. This is where choir members that miss too many notes, this is where we put them. Right, so there's some interesting and slightly scary places around. So this is the second level of our tour. Now the next level, we're going to go up a very tall ladder and get off the ladder and climb a bit, and we're going to actually be in the bell chamber itself, where the bells, the belfry, as it were, where all 16 bells hang. David is joining me in the actual belfry now. I'm a little bit on the other side. See me momentarily. There I am. Right. So we're amongst the bells here. They're in two tiers, as you can see. The big bells are lower, and the smaller bells are above, all waiting for that next ring. So David and I are going to be very certain to be downstairs before 3 o'clock. This you would not want to be here at that moment. So David, I'm not sure how good our mic is. I'm going to lean back through the bit there. If you want to show here, this space is not technically enclosed. They're louvers, so that the sound can go out and down. And it basically keeps the rain and snow out. Though if it's real windy, it can get in. It doesn't really hurt anything. But there's some good views down the louvers. Let's see, I'll come this way. If you're looking down there, I can talk while you... So I'm going to talk loudly. The bells were all given in honor or memory of somebody, or given by specific groups. And I won't go over all of them, but low D was the bishop's bell. Low E is rector's bell. And the third bell, F sharp, is the Brown University bell. This bell was presented by John Carter Brown and was given on the condition that it would be rung each commencement day. We think we've missed a few years of that, but we started trying to do it again, so that on commencement day we ring that F sharp bell for Brown. I won't read all of them, but some of the more interesting ones to me is the B bell was given by the Rhode Island Bar Association. Can you imagine if we contacted the Rhode Island Bar now and said, we'd like you to give a bell to Grace Church? They'd laugh so loud we'd have to hang up the phone. The C sharp bell was from the Physicians of Providence. The Grace Church Choir gave the middle D bell. The Sunday School gave the E bell, and so forth, all the way up to the staff of the governor of Rhode Island gave one of the bells. These bells first played on March 31st, 1861, which was Easter Day, just before the terrible Civil War broke out. See some of the inscriptions on the bells. Most of them are inscribed. And David, you've probably done this, but once you've shown that inscription, let's show on this D, there's this exterior hammer, but there's also an interior ringing mechanism. So this is one of the bells that can be rung more than one way. It can be struck from the outside, or it can be rung from the inside. So then, here we go. We'll meet under the mechanism. So these are those wires that come up from the clavier all the way down 2 levels down, and then ring each of these bells. So the clavier rings from the inside, and the exterior strikers were for the clock mechanism, I guess. So I'm going to now climb up to our next and last level that we're going to. Let David show you some more pictures while I'm climbing, and we'll meet up in what is the actual clock face room, where the clock faces are, and where you can see how the time is actually controlled up there above these bells. I will try not to tip my head as I go. David, can you get a shot of me up here? Now that I'm sort of safely here and holding on. I'm going to go even some more. So I didn't tell you exactly the truth. I said 4 levels, but it's really 5. This is the 4th. I forgot about this one. Thanks for being patient. So David doesn't have to rush climbing all these things. So this room serves no purpose except space. It shows the wonderful rubble and stone interior of the tower that's not been plastered, so you can actually see. It's just wonderful. Actually, when I saw this, I thought this would be a great office, except for the climb. There's a handy coat rack over here. Elegantly made coat rack if you get this far and decide you need to hang up your frock or your jacket. Only the highest quality lighting, of course. And then over on this side, we have that rod that David showed you in the clock, the green pole that goes all the way up, and it continues here on up to what is really the 5th level, and I promise as high as we're going today, the clock face room. So here we are, resonance. Here we are in the clock face room. So if you've ever stood in the parking lot or on Westminster Street and looked up at the tower and you see the 4 clock faces on the 4 sides, and you think, I wonder how big those actually are in real life. Well, I'll show you. I'm going to step right inside one. So here I am standing inside. This is the height of the clock face, from my feet to my fingers. So when you look up from the street level, you can remember that it's this big. And there are 4 of these. And here are those rods. David's actually quite close to where the main rod comes up. And that rod connects to these 4. I think it's called a driver. And they all come together here in the middle. So that when one turns, they all turn. And they stay pretty darn close together. They're slightly off now, but just barely. And they turn so slowly, of course, you can't tell. So there are several things that fascinate me about this space. The size of the clock faces. The fact that I'm gonna pass on going any higher. But the ladders and platforms continue all the way to the top of this masonry steeple. I like to do comparative numbers, as you know. I told you about the nave ceiling being 65 feet high. Exeter Cathedral in England is 68. This tower is 206, tower and steeple, 206 feet high. That's high. Now, if you compare it to Salisbury Cathedral in England, it's not so high, because Salisbury is 400. But if you compare it to lots of steeples and towers around the world that are high, 206 feet is pretty darn high. Grace also sits in a very low place in Providence. As you know, downtown Providence, many of you know, is a valley, basically. And the cathedral, the Catholic cathedral, has 2 very tall towers. The cathedral is up considerably from Grace, physically up a hill as you go up Weybosset Street and Broad Street. But if you go to the east side and you look back across downtown, you'll see that the tower here at Grace, the steeple, is actually higher still than the cathedral's towers, and it sits below it. So it's really tall, that's my point. And you can see that. So what we thought we'd do is a sort of a culmination. Each one of the clock faces, right around near noon, has a little door. And I think the one we'll choose, David, is this one because we can see down the church and get a concept of that. We're going to go over to the one that actually faces towards Weybosset Street and Providence Performing Arts Center. We'll go to that clock face. This is also a good one because you get to see, you can look out to the harbor and to the bay, the river, the smokestacks of the chimney. So I'll let David come over and give you a nice view there. So we're so fortunate to call this place home. Those of us who come to church here, who make it our spiritual home, for me and for Rodney, and of course for David, it actually is our home. We actually live here, and quite a home it is. And I was just thinking about those bells in 1861. They went in just before this horrible outbreak of the Civil War, which lasted for 4 years and took thousands upon thousands of lives. So we're in our own kind of civil war these days, with thousands of lives being lost. Unfortunately, it's a harder enemy to fight and find. But we came through the Civil War, and lots of wars and lots of disease since then, and we'll come through this, and we'll all be back here together someday, safely and hopefully with good health, and able to rejoice and celebrate again. In the meantime, I hope that being able to see corners and crevices and stairways and stairwells and hidden views of this place that you all love so much, that we all love so much, has helped to keep you feel connected. We have one more Views of Grace, which will be out on the last Tuesday, I believe it's the last Tuesday in May, which will be also a very special edition and something we hope you will enjoy as well. We can't go any higher physically, so we'll try to go higher spiritually on that one. And until then, stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you all very soon.